Well, thank you very much, Eileen, for making this event possible. And I have particular thanks to Judith Ziskin. Dr. Judith Ziskin is one of your members, but also is one of my dearest and oldest friends. I lived in San Diego for 40 years. I'm now currently professor emeritus of biology at San Diego State University, and I'm not a historian by training, but my expertise comes from the fact that I'm telling a story about my father. Okay, and here he is there. And I wrote a book about my father in his honor, but I honored not only my father, but remember, this is Veterans Day, so it's appropriate that I'm honoring all those who served in that great war of World War II, but also in previous and subsequent conflicts. But before I get started with the story, my father's story, I'd like to also thank all of you who are attending tonight. There's a huge number of people on this Zoom. I'm so sorry. The original plan was that I was going to meet with you in person at the synagogue, and so that I would normally have been able to look into your lovely faces and answer your questions on a one-on-one basis, and I'm really so sorry that that events have conspired against that, and I think we all know the drill. But it's wonderful that we at least have this technology that help us interact with each other. So the story is about my father, who was born Alessandro Sabadini in 1916 in Rome, Italy. He was born an Italian Jew, and he escaped fascist Italy after having lived about 18 years under the Mussolini's fascist rule. He escaped to the United States, and I'll talk a little bit about how he did that, but it's a very intriguing story in and of itself. He escaped to the United States of America with some difficulty, but nonetheless did it. And then eventually he became a soldier in the United States Army, and not just a normal soldier, but he became a non-commissioned officer in what was called G2 intelligence. It was the first, it was the inception of the military intelligence service, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But what was his mission in life and in that moment? His mission was not only to serve the U.S. Army to combat the naked aggression and the fascist government of Mussolini's Italy, and the Nazism that had spread all over most of Western Europe. But he had a personal mission. Not only was that a soldier, but he had a personal mission. The personal mission of Alex Sabadini, born Alessandro Sabadini, was to save his family. He had a personal mission, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that. But there's a broader story in the book that I wrote about my father, in that it's a story of a terrible episode in history. Most of you, probably all of you, know about that story, punctuated by a terrible episode in our history, but there were periods of undaunted courage and immense personal sacrifice. And my father and those others of the greatest generation stood up and to be counted, and they put their lives on the line, and they fought for the right thing. They fought for democracy, freedom, and they fought against fascism. Normally, I would have played a aria from Giuseppe's Nabucco, Va Pensiero, which briefly one of the lines of that opera, of the Va Pensiero chorus of the Hebrew slaves, says, "O mia patria, si bella e perduta," which means, "Oh, my country, so beautiful and lost." And before I talk about details of my father, I want to talk about how one loses one's country. And my father lost his country in two ways that I want to talk about tonight. One is the simplest way of losing your country, not simplest, but the most common way of losing one's country is when your country is invaded by a foreign power. In the case of Italy, through most of the war, Italy was under control of the German army and and to some extent in collaboration with the fascist regime. Nonetheless, you can lose your country that way, just as the Hebrew slaves, just as the Jews of Jerusalem and that part of the Middle East were lost their country to the Babylonians and were taken as slaves to Babylonia. They lost their country, and that's the subject of the Jews of Verdi's opera Nabucco. So you can lose your country in one way, and that is physically lose your country. There's a second, more insidious way of losing your country, and that is when the moral compass of your country is lost, is when the principles, the foundation in which your country was founded, was conceived, is corrupted, and the moral compass is lost. And we see that sometimes in the modern era, and there's some discussion of that even in this country. But nonetheless, in fascist Italy, from about 1921 through the end of World War II, for about 22 years, Italy, my father's country of birth, was lost. He lost his country, and it was lost through the fascist regime and government of Benito Mussolini. And here, of course, is Benito Mussolini with his buddy Adolf Hitler. You know who these guys, these nefarious characters are. They conspired with the Japanese and others to initiate a period of naked aggression and imperialism that engulfed the whole world in World War II, and resulted in, as you know, at least 60 million deaths. Most of those deaths were, some of those deaths were military casualties, and some were, a large percentage of them were civilian, and that doesn't even include the 6,000 Jews and others who were murdered in the death camps during the Holocaust, or the millions of Europeans and others who died as a consequence of the famine and disease that resulted from that war. I'd like to also point out one other thing, is that, you know, Mussolini predated Hitler. Mussolini's fascism and totalitarianism predated Hitler, even though Hitler took it to an all new level of terribleness, of horribleness. But, you know, Italian fascism began around 1922. Hitler came along about 10 or 11 years later. Another point I'd like to make is that both Hitler and Mussolini were duly appointed in a democratic process to their positions. Mussolini was appointed as the president of the Chamber of Deputies by the King Victor Emmanuel, and as far as Hitler is concerned, he was appointed Chancellor of Germany, as you all know, in 1933. So both of these guys did not come to power as a consequence of a coup d'etat. It was through a democratic process. Okay, what about the Sabadini family? Here is a portrait of the Sabadini family, and the patriarch of the Sabadini family was Umberto, my grandfather, my father's father, and Silvia Sabadini, my grandmother. And they produced 9 children, whom you see here. And the littlest guy here was about 4 or 5 years old, was my father. He was the youngest of 9, and he was the darling in the family, and he was referred to by his loving mother and the rest of them as Il Maschio d'Oro. Maschio d'Oro means the golden boy. He was golden not by, he didn't have golden hair, but he was golden by virtue of the fact that he was the favorite of the family. And the Sabadini family was a typical Italian family. They were Italians first. Their religion happened to be Judaism, but they were Italians. They were Italians first, and they were well integrated into the social and economic fabric of Italian society. My grandfather had a printing factory, for example, in the center of Rome. He was an entrepreneur and a well-established member of the business community of Rome. And they were quite affluent, not super rich, but they weren't noble by birth, but they had a bearing, as you can see from this picture. And the men of the Sabadini family, when they came of age, worked in the factory, in the printing factory. They were printing books and other things. So they had a very large house in Rome, in Via Castelfidardo, Rome, with a multi-story building that was the family residence, where all of the family lived at various floors of that building. And they had a printing factory, a printing business just across on the other street in Via Palestro. And then they also had a summer villa near Rome, about 45 miles southwest of Rome, near the seaside towns of Anzio and Nettuno. Many of you know about the Battle of Anzio. We're going to talk about that in a minute, but Nettuno and Anzio were close together along the seaside. And my father spent about 23 years of his life frolicking on the beaches of Nettuno and Anzio in the summers, just like the rest of the Sabadini family did. My grandfather's best friend actually was a Gentile, was not a Jew, was a Catholic. His name was Roberto Martella. And this guy is going to have an important role in the story I'm going to tell you. But Roberto had a son named Mario, who was about the time of the war, was about 18 years of age. But Roberto was a protege of my grandfather, in the sense that he was trained in the printing business, and Roberto had his own printing business. So they were friendly competitors, and they were best friends. So that's how well integrated they were. They were Italian first, and these guys, my Sabadini family, just happened to, their religion was Judaism. A lot of their friends were Catholics. Well, this idyllic, wonderful family, affluent, well-integrated family, all that happiness changed in 1938. 1938 was the beginning of the racial laws. And it started with a August 5th publication of a propaganda arm of the fascist government and it was entitled La Difesa della Razza, which means the defense of the race. And it was produced by this manifesto of racial scientists. And here's what this manifesto basically said in a nutshell. There are human races exist, there are big ones and little ones, and the concept of human race is purely a biological concept, which absolutely, this is not true. I'm a biologist, I can tell you it's not true. But anyway, let's get into the other declarations of this terrible manifesto that it declared, and you can see in yellow, that Italy is of the Aryan descent, and its civilization is Aryan. And then it goes on to say that there is now a pure Italian race. Okay, well, there's no such thing as Italian race. Italian is the people who live in Italy, that's a language group in a country. It's not a race. But anyway, they declared this, and most egregiously and incredibly, the manifesto declared that Italians declare themselves openly racist. Now, can you imagine they're proud to say that? Okay, I'm proud to say I'm a racist. Well, they're proud. Who says that? Some very extreme radicals, white supremacists maybe in this country, but this was a government that was declaring themselves openly racist. And of course, what the final conclusion of the whole manifesto is that Jews do not belong to the Italian race. So basically, they are saying to the Jews of Italy that you are no longer Italians. You are of a different race and you don't belong. And so between September and November of 1938, there was an institution of a whole variety, hundreds actually, of racial laws. I'm just going to give you a snippet of some of those racial laws. But of course, Jews were excluded from public life, basically public schools, universities. They couldn't be professors. They were excluded from public office, including high-level positions in the fascist party. And they were excluded from about 17 listed professions, including law and medicine. Mixed marriages were forbidden, and foreign Jews were considered enemy aliens and were expelled from the country. They were told to leave. And here's another law that you might not think is that important, but it's going to be important for my father. Jews were excluded from the military. They were considered to be security risks. And here's my father in 1938 as a soldier in the army of the Italian army. He was drafted in the Italian army, like all men that when they turned 18 had to go in the Italian army, and he proudly served, just as many of his relatives did. In fact, his uncle Alfredo Danola was a member of this very famous group called the Bersaglieri, kind of like a special forces group, and Alfredo and other countrymen of the Sabadini and related family served in World War I very proudly, and they defended the country of Italy against the Austrian invasion and during World War I. So they were very, very proud to be Italians. They're very, very proud to serve in the military, just like any other patriot. But everything changed with the institution of 1938 racial laws. And here is this document on the right. It's all in Italian, but it's basically in a dishonorable discharge that was given to my father. He was dishonorably discharged from the Italian army, and given in red here, red pen. The reason is given because of the racial law number 1728 of the La Difesa della Raza. And he was actually imprisoned in the brig for a short time. His head was shaved, and he was dishonorably discharged and kicked out of the army, and he was humiliated. And so he also was, now as a private citizen, was required to carry this document. This document is a racial identity card. And this basically says that I have to present myself to anyone who asks, any policeman or whomever, any position of person of authority, and declare that I, Alessandro Sabadini, son of Umberto and Silvia, born in Rome, I am declaring that I am a member of the Jewish race. And I have this document in my possession. And it's incredible. And you can see how many times it must have been folded and unfolded because the Carabinieri, the police, were asking, for this guy to show, to identify himself as a bona fide Italian citizen. Of course, he wasn't a bona fide Italian citizen. And even with this, even though he was not, he was considered to be undesirable as a consequence of being a Jew, with this card, he was able to, this identity card, he was able to obtain some rations and so on and so forth. But it also put him at a grave personal risk. So some of the other laws, Jews were not allowed to own property, and their properties could be confiscated by the government. Jews were not only prohibited from owning businesses, but managing companies as well, and owning land and so on and so forth. And so what did the Sabadini family do? Remember, they had three properties. They had the palazzo in Rome, the house in Rome, they had the printing factory in Rome, and then they had this summer villa that they had at the beach, at the seashore near Anzio Nettuno on the Tyrrhenian Sea. And the plan was hatched by my grandfather and one of the older sons, Arnaldo Sabadini. The idea was to give the property away to a sympathetic Gentile. This also was against the law. And remember, I told you about this Martella family, that my grandfather's best friend was Roberto Martella, and his son was Mario Martella. Here's Mario Martella in 2007, where he was awarded the position of righteous among nations by Yad Vashem in Israel. You all know what the Yad Vashem is. He was also given the Medal of Honor by the Italian government for his heroic efforts. I'm going to tell you about some of his heroic efforts in saving the Sabadinis from the racial laws. But one of the many things that Mario Martella did was he agreed to accept the title of the Sabadini properties. And this was so that the properties would not be confiscated by the fascist government. And this was at some risk to Mario Martella, because that was against the law. It was one of the racial laws was illegal for a Gentile or anybody to circumvent the racial laws, in this particular racial law, by accepting the properties of a Jew, rather than having the properties being confiscated. So anyway, another thing that, and the idea also, the bargain that was struck, that was very easy to strike between the Martella family and Sabadini family, that if the war was to end badly for the Sabadinis, that is, none would have survived the war, at least none of the male Sabadinis would survive the war, then Mario Martella would take permanent possession, retain possession of those properties. But on the other hand, if the war would end well for the Sabadinis and some would survive, then the bargain was that Mario Martella would give back title to the Sabadinis, which in fact happened, because the Sabadinis did survive. So I'm telling you that there was a positive outcome. And not all of the Gentiles that did accept that the properties in the name of from Jewish friends and others, not all of those Gentiles did in fact make good on their promise, but the Martella family did. Another thing that the Martella family did, and Mario participated in, was the Martella family were anti-fascist, Antifas. Okay, they were the first Antifas maybe, and they were involved in the partisan movement, the Partigiani, and the Partigiani had a lot of different roles, but these guys, the Martella family, what they did was they printed anti-fascist literature and false documents and so on. And one of the things that Mario Martella did, being owner of the Sabadini factory, is he used that factory, the Sabadini factory, when it was vacated by the Sabadinis, and they had to escape and so on. He used the printing factory to print that subversive anti-fascist literature, which later was discovered by the Sabadinis who survived, and they were very happy that the Sabadini printing factory was put to such good anti-fascist use. Another thing that Mario Martella did is there was a very important day on October 16, 1943, when the fascists and the Nazis, the Gestapo in particular, did a raid on it was actually on the day of the Shabbats, and the Sabbath, and they raided a couple of thousand homes of Jews living in the central of Rome. The Jews were whose names were on this blacklist were arrested by the Gestapo with the collaboration of the fascist police, and they took, this was October 16th, and about 1,200 Jews were arrested they were taken out of bed. They were woken up about 3 in the morning, and they were hustled out, and they were arrested, and they were imprisoned. They eventually ended up in Auschwitz. This about 2 days later, another 1,000 or so Jews were rounded up. In that couple-day period, about 2,500 Jews were rounded up and sent away. But Mario Martella and the Martella family, because they were cognizant of, because they were involved in the partisan movement, the Partigiani movement, they warned my grandfather about the impending arrest that morning, and Mario Martella spirited my grandfather and grandmother out of Rome into safety, into the countryside, into a country villa that was owned by the Martella family. So as a consequence, of those many, many actions, Mario Martella was awarded righteous among nations by the Yad Vashem. Well, anyway, what was the plan for Alessandro Sabadini, my father? My father's plan was to escape to the United States and join the military. The other Sabadinis went into hiding, and we'll talk more about that later if we have time, but you get the idea. But my father was the only Sabadini not to have a family. He didn't have a wife. He was kicked out of the army. He didn't have a job. He was just recently discharged, and so he made his way to the United States with some difficulty. It's all written in the book, what tricks he played to gain residency in the United States. But eventually, his desire was to not just rest on his laurels in the safety of the United States of America. His mission was to join the U.S. military and go back and save his family. And so not only was he just going to be a normal soldier, but after some difficulty, because he was an enemy alien, and they initially didn't want him when he tried to volunteer for the army, but eventually somebody realized that these guys were valuable, that the German-born, Italian-born, and even Jewish, Japanese-born residents of the United States had value because they knew the language, because they knew the physical landscape of the countries that they were where they were born, and they knew something of the politics, and most importantly, they knew the language. And so they were enlisted in a novel school, an intelligence school that was called Camp Ritchie, Maryland, and it was a military service and training center, and they were trained in the interrogation of prisoners of war and defectors. They were worked with partisans. They were trained how to work with partisans and gaining intelligence. They also, a very small group of these Ritchie boys were trained in how to assess any enemy documents that might have been obtained when one captures the command post of a military commander. And what these Ritchie boys were to do were to take all these sources of information. It's kind of like the CIA analyst group in the field, and these intelligence officers then would create intelligence summaries and send them back to Allied headquarters. And they would create documents like the one you see on the right, Order of Battle of the German Army. Well, my father was part of this very small subgroup of this Ritchie boys called, and the G2 intelligence group called Advanced Document Section. And his, yes, he carried a Thompson submachine gun. He had a 45 caliber sidearm, but his most important weapon was a Leica 3 camera, because what he did, his job was to, and his group of 8 documents men were to go with the advanced troops, the first troops in the field. When an enemy headquarters was to be captured, this group of Italian, German speakers, also they had language skills in French and other languages, were to go in and assess whether or not there were documents that had strategic value. And then they would take, my father's job was to take photographs of these documents and send them back to Allied field headquarters. And I have in my possession, what you see on the left is a scrapbook of photos, about 400 photos my father took, because when he wasn't photographing the documents on the command centers of the enemy, he was photographing the war. And so there's about 400 personal photographs that my father took of the war, and he titled that photo album War as I Knew It. You can see how old it is. It's 70+ years old. And here's some photos from that collection of my father's personal photos of some of the documents that were amassed at various headquarters. On the left is fascist and Nazi headquarters in Rome when they captured Rome in June 1944. And on the right are the boxes and boxes of documents that they crated up when my father was involved in the capture of Mussolini's headquarters in April 1945. So that was their job. And here's one of the documents, an example of a telegram to Führer, to Adolf Hitler. You can see, Dear Führer here up on the upper left, signed by Mussolini. Mussolini is begging Hitler to bring some troops back into Italy and help them resist the Allied progression in that theater of operations. My father was naturalized actually on the battlefield, and I won't go into that detail, but it's very important because, here he was, a non-U.S. citizen fighting for America and shedding his blood. He actually got a Purple Heart in Sicily. And, I might point out there are about 35,000 non-citizens in the United States Army currently that are risking their lives and shedding their blood for this country, even though they're not citizens. Okay, my father then, he landed in North Africa in Operation Torch in 1943 and prosecuted that war. That's where he got naturalized as a citizen. And then the G2 intelligence service was then planning the invasion of Sicily and then up the boot of Italy. And my father participated in that beach landing in Sicily. In fact, when he landed in those southern beaches of Sicily was the first time he had set foot on Italian soil in almost 5 years, about 4 years. And remember, the Sabatini family did not know that my father was a United States soldier, a GI, and my father did not know that the fate of his family. So there was no communication. We were at war with the United States, was at war with Italy. There was no communication between the two. The Sabatinis were in hiding, and nobody knew that my father was a soldier. Anyway, then my father participated in several of these beach landings, Salerno and other beach landings, and there was a terrible battle that was fought about halfway up the boot of Italy, near a town of Cassino and near a monastery called Monte Cassino. And here it is in a blow up, and a very skilled strategic commander and tactician, Albert Kesselring, who's shown here in the photograph on the right, lower right, was the commander of the Mediterranean theater and for the German government, and he amassed a formidable defensive posture that split Italy in half, and this was called the Gustav Line. And for months and months and months, the Allies couldn't break through the Gustav Line. I talk about this in the book, but they couldn't break through, so they decided to make an end run. And who made that decision was General Mark Clark, and he put this guy Lucas in charge of an amphibious invasion all the way over here to the little seaside towns of Nettuno and Anzio to outflank the German 10th Army and achieve a breakthrough at that impasse at the Gustav Line. Well, where do you think, you heard those terms, those names of those towns, Anzio, Nettuno? Well, that's where the Sabatini summer villa was. And in fact, of the various landing sites, here's now is Anzio, and here's Nettuno, and here is Rome. Well, Rome is up here along this highway here. You can't see it, but in this map. But anyway, my father coincidentally lands where this arrow is. He landed with a special forces group at what was called X-ray landing force on what was called Yellow Beach, and what it turned out to be is he landed right in front, 200 yards in front of the Sabatini summer villa. And I talk about the stresses involved and all that, but the beach that he landed in was the beach that he played in for the first 23 years of his life every summer. And he kicked soccer balls and chased the girls and did all the things that boys and kids do. And that beach that was a beach of pleasure all of a sudden turned into a beach of terror. And instead of being dressed in a bathing suit, he was dressed in army uniform, and instead of carrying a soccer ball, he carried a Thompson submachine gun. Here's a photo from his personal collection showing the initial troops landing at Anzio. And here's the summer villa at the time when my father arrived, a little beat up, but it still was standing. One of his jobs was to work with the Italian partisans, and now he got a chance to work not only with just normal Italian partisans, but whom he photographed here, for example, in this picture. But these were Italian partisans whom he knew, because these were guys that he played soccer with in Nettuno and Anzio area. And so he knew they're all about his age, and they were working to resist the fascists and resist the Nazis, and he knew those guys. So he had a special relationship with the partisans, and it was easy for him to gain their trust and to help assess the disposition of enemy forces. He also worked, a lot of these partisans were women. You can see this lovely young lady here with some kind of a gun draped across her shoulder. So they were serious. They're smiling because they're getting liberated by the Americans, but they're also smiling because my father was a very handsome guy. And then he also worked with some Italian soldiers who switched sides. These are famous Bersaglieri soldiers who now ended up in the British 8th Army. Well, there were 4 months of stalemate in this terrible Anzio Nettuno area, and I won't go into all the details, but it was a horrific bombardment that was called Shell Alley. And my father got PTSD at the time. They called it battle fatigue. but part of the battle fatigue was not only associated with this relentless bombardment, but also the stress that he was under in knowing that knowing that he was only 45 miles away from knowing the fate of his family. Well, there was an initial breakthrough in late May of 1944, but the result was about 90,000 casualties on both the German and the American side, and about a third of the total casualties actually were Italian citizens. Here's my daughter Amy and my son Scott, who I took them to the cemetery in Nettuno that honors the American and British soldiers who died there. There finally was a reunion in Rome between my father and the Sabatini family. I don't have time to tell you the great emotional relief that my father had, but you can imagine upon learning that the Sabatinis were safe. And I recount in the book the moment in which my father learned that his brothers and sisters and his mother and father were unharmed, and they were in hiding, and they were soon to emerge. And here you can see my father with his brothers, and here you can see some other family members. And this guy here, Gilberto, was his nephew, 14 years of age. He played an important role in that reunion. If I don't have time to tell you that emotional moment, but it's recounted in the book, and I challenge you to keep a dry eye when you read that very momentous moment. But I'll just tell you one thing, one snippet of it. When my father was reunited with his father and his mother, Umberto and Silvio were sitting on a sofa in the house of the Martella family. That's another story in itself. And my father was seated between his two parents, and Silvia, reported by Gilberto Sabatini, who was there, Silvia put her arm around her youngest son, Alessandro, with such a force that my father reputedly couldn't get up off the sofa, and she kept repeating over and over and over again, "Il mio maschio d'oro, il mio maschio d'oro, il mio maschio d'oro, my golden boy, my golden boy, my golden." She held him with such a tight grip for fear that she'd lose him again, like she did 5 years previously. So that's just a little snippet of that. Well, there was still a war to fight. After the liberation of Rome, June 4th, 1944, and my father had to say goodbye to the family temporarily. He had them, and the U.S. Fifth Army marched up towards northern Italy to capture, not only to kick the Germans out of Italy, but also to destroy the fascist government. The fascist government had headquarters up here in the north of Italy, very close to Switzerland and Austria, along the shores of what's called Lake Garda. And if I were, I'm so disappointed that I can't see your friendly faces, but I would ask for a raise of hands. How many people have been to Lake Garda? I bet there would be a lot of hands raised, because it's a beautiful part of Italy. And it's a long story, but Mussolini had set up a fascist government in the little town of Salò, and it's popularly referred to, the fascist government of the North was popularly referred to as the Republic of Slow as a consequence. That's where all the ministerial offices were. And then the Nazis had some of their offices and headquarters and hospitals and things in the Gardone area. But Mussolini had a villa and headquarters in this beautiful little lake town called Gagnano. And I'm going to show you some photos of what they kind of looked like. Here's Villa Feltrinelli with Mussolini's residence. And my father took a photo of that in late April 1945. And here's what it looks like today. You see, now it's a very swanky hotel. But my father, after the breakout in the in the Gothic line, that the last defensive posture of Kesselring, General Kesselring, in the very, very north of Italy between Bologna and Florence. There was a breakout, and my father was charged with moving with some special forces troop. He was given a special forces pass, and the object of that mission of that special forces team was to capture Mussolini. They arrived at Mussolini's headquarters and his villa, but Mussolini had escaped a few hours earlier. He was eventually, as you probably know the story, but I recount it in the book with great detail. Mussolini was captured by partisans as he was trying to escape across the border of, towards Austria. Oh, by the way, here's the Mussolini's office. Before I tell you about the death of Mussolini, this was Mussolini's office was near where his villa was, and this is what it looks like today. And here's what it looked like when my father occupied that office, and he sat at Mussolini's desk. I snuck into the villa, to the what's called Villa delle Orsolini at the time. I snuck in there and I took a picture of of Mussolini's office, and here's the desk that my father sat at, that desk, and that desk was cluttered with undisturbed artifacts and documents and materials that Mussolini, because he had to hightail it out of town at the last minute, and he hightailed it out because he knew that the partisans and the Allies were coming to get him. Mussolini was eventually murdered and executed and hung upside down, along with his mistress and some other fascist collaborators, from the rafters of an Esso gas station in Milan. My father was there to witness that tragic event. Here is the wall against which Mussolini and his mistress were put against and shot by this guy here on the right, an Italian partisan. And here is a present day group of neo-fascists who are trying to rehabilitate the cult of Mussolini and his fascism. Anyway, so this is the last slide. You know, kind of running out of time. You know, I'm proud to be the son of Alex Sabadini, who was part of a heroic band of men and women who fought bravely against the naked aggression and fascism in Europe. He was also part of the greatest generation, because after they won that war, they came back and they built the great society that we are so very fortunate to have inherited. So I'm very proud to have on this day of this Veterans Day to be the son of a veteran. I'd like to say, before I open up the question and answers, that my dad has amassed a huge collection of artifacts and documents and photographs that are now, we are in the last throes of entering into completing a contract with the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. I'm sure all of you have been there. And the archivists and the other principals at the Holocaust Museum recognize that my father's collection is unique and robust. And it's the story of Italian Jews in the war is what they endured is not a story that's well known. We know lots about what the terrible Holocaust against which was perpetrated against the Hungarian Jews, German Jews, Polish Jews, and so on. We don't know much about the Italian Jewish story, and so I'm very proud to donate these documents to the Holocaust Museum so that that story at least would be told. And we hope someday someone will make a full-length feature film about this story. Anyway, if you are interested in reading the book, you can either contact Eileen, or here's an email that you can buy the book on Amazon, or you can contact me personally through that email address. Anyway, here's my father shortly after the war, married Elaine Judy Dreyfus. That's another famous Jewish name, as you know. And, you know, I'm one of the results of that very happy union, and I'm proud not only to be the son Alex and Judy Sabatini, but I'm proud to be the recipient of to be a progeny of the greatest generation, those who not only won that war, but built this great society that I was so very fortunate to have inherited. And so with that, I'd like to open it up to Q&A, and thank you very much for your very, very, very kind attention. I wish I could shake your hands.
Wow, wow, wow. Just what a treat. I saw so many great things come through the chat. A couple I wanted to bring up before we open it to some other raised hands, and we'll have some other people come on screen. One question that came by from Neil was, what was your father like at home?
You mean, oh, well, okay, every adoring son believes his father was the best father, but I tell you, it's universally recognized by all of my friends and my at the time, and my brother and his friends, that my father was a special person. And okay, the Dalai Lama is a pretty good guy, and but the Schweitzer is a pretty good guy, and but my father was, in my mind, up with the greats of as a personal favorite. So he was a very warm-hearted person. Many fathers are, but he was. I wouldn't be the person I am today without his influence, and my mother too. My mother was quite the intellectual, so my interest in intellectual things came from my father, but up from my mother as well. But my father said that his humanism and his humanity and his love for fellow man was forged in a foxhole. He worked with, he fought with Muslims and Jews and Catholics and East Indians and Pakistanis and North Africans, and all manner of creed, religion, and ethnicities, and they were united in a goal of fighting fascism and National Socialism. And he learned in that foxhole that there's more that unites us than there is that would otherwise divide us. And that's an important lesson for today. I mean, that's what my father taught us.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing. I do want to, I think Marsha Lubick has a question. I see her hand up.
Hi, I'm just curious about what happened with your family after the war was over. Were they able to return to a fairly normal life, or was there still a lot of anti-Semitism? I know I've heard stories about, Polish Jews who went back and it was horrible, but I'm not sure about Italy.
Well, if we had time, I would go through the unique experience that Italian Jews have in Italy. That started out, the Sabatini family started out in Renaissance Venice. Okay? They were initially the Shabbati. You know what Shabbati means? Those who observe the Sabbath. But then their name, they changed it to a more Italian-esque name, Sabatini, which means those who observe the Sabbath. Anyway, and throughout the ages, the Jews were, like many other places, were discriminated against. And that's why there were very few Jews in basically almost a theocracy. Italy was almost a theocracy for most of its life. So there was severe anti-Semitism before the war and then after the war as well, but not like Poland and not like other places. Because, as I told you at the beginning, my father's family was well integrated into the social and economic fabric of Italy. And then after the war, they reintegrated and they became very successful. They continued their success. And that's a tribute to the Italian people. The Italian people are quite tolerant, let's say, in general. It doesn't mean that there aren't fascists there even today. Doesn't mean there isn't anti-Semitism there today like there is everywhere, even in this country. But in general, Italian people are tolerant of Jews, and so they were still treated very well, and they're doing very well today.
One of the questions that also came up that I think may parlay off what you just said in terms of where things are now, whatever happened to all the property?
Well, as I said, the property was returned back to the Sabadinis immediately after the war. So it happened immediately. And so the printing factory continued until about 10 years ago, when, that generation of Sabadinis died. That is, my uncles, the last of my uncles died, okay? And so you know how things go. So it didn't continue. But the Sabadini family is still a quite coherent, loving, and well-integrated family, and I'm very close to them. I talk to them on email and WhatsApp all the time, and we had kind of a reunion at Yom Kippur recently, where we had the Sabadinis from Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, Rome, San Francisco Bay Area, and up here where I live in Oregon. So, we're still a close-knit family, and that's a consequence of the culture that was family values that was created initially by my grandfather Umberto Sabadini, but also promulgated by my father and his brothers and sisters throughout the years, subsequent year. So I'm very proud to be Sabadini. My daughter, when she got married, she kept the name Sabadini, Amy Sabadini. Okay.
That's awesome.
So she's a Sabadini. Okay. My son is a winemaker. He spent a year living in Italy, learning how to be a winemaker. Now he works in our wine growing region here in Oregon, called the Willamette Valley. But he also worked in Sonoma County, and closer to your neck of the woods.
I took down the screen share just so I can get a visual of the room and see if anyone was raising hands that wasn't doing it through the chat itself. Did anyone else have a question?
Well, I'm waiting. I want them to go.
There was a lot of comments in the chat about other films and books about similar topics and similar stories. I know Sandra Silverstein shared one about a film that was shared at the Jewish Film Festival. Carlo Levy's book. There was a book, let's see here, Beneath a Scarlet Sky. So it seems like there's been a lot of content out there, and it's great that we also have this to add into the mix. I wonder, while we're all on, I see, Sandra has her hand up. Let me unmute you. Oh, try one more time.
There we go. I'm not showing my picture, but that's okay. I'm wearing my pajamas, folks. I do want to say that Jewish Film Festival that will arrive in February, we are showing an Italian movie starring Vittorio Gassman's son, who was a great movie star in Italy and is Jewish, and his son is also Jewish. And I invite you, it's called Thou Shalt Not Hate, and I invite you to come and see it. And if you miss it there, the Italian Film Festival, of which I am also on the selection committee, will be showing it. There was a movie that we showed about the town in the South where a lot of Jews went from the concentration camps who escaped. They were brought there by the Jewish brigade soldiers that were in the British Army, and they all were waiting for ships to take them to Israel and immigrate illegally. And they became so integrated into the town that many of them go back to visit the people in Italy.
Well, what I would invite you to do is, if you want to send me that information, I can share with people that signed up for this class.
Yeah, I
have all of their email addresses.
Yeah,
I saw a question here from Ronnie for Roger about Roger, what did your father do in the U.S. for a living?
Oh, okay. Well, he really ended up I was born in New York. He worked in the Briarwood business. That's a really long story. That is the way of he was collecting the wood that used to manufacture pipes, smoking pipes. But his real vocation was to be an antique appraiser and auctioneer, and that started in San Francisco when I was about a year. So he moved from New York, Upper West Side, Manhattan, to San Francisco Bay Area, and he became an antique appraiser and auctioneer, and he became actually president of the American Society of Appraisers, and he became president of the International Society of Appraisers. I don't remember the exact name of that group, but so he became a well integrated and productive member of society. My mother and my father supported the Symphony Guild, the Opera Guild, the Boy Scouts. I was a Boy Scout, I became an Eagle Scout. They were very civically minded people in the Bay Area, in Sacramento and San Francisco Bay Area. So they did, they were part of that greatest generation. Okay, they built a society, they built it economically, and they built it, the culture that we are so fortunate to have inherited. But can I get back to an earlier question and remind me
of course,
how the Jews were fared in Italy? In Poland and in Hungary and in Germany, 85% or so of Jews perished in the ovens of Auschwitz and other places. But in Italy, the reverse was true, that 85% of the Jews survived. Only 15% were murdered. So there's a very long story. We can talk about that, and I talk about it in the book, about that exception to the rule, why the Jews of Italy fared better, despite the Nazis and despite the fascists. So I just want to make that mention.
Wonderful. I see one, I saw a question come here, and this actually might be our last question. We are so cognizant of honoring people's time, and when we do an hour, we promise an hour and we stick to it. Did you speak Italian growing up in your household and with your father?
Actually not. My mother was a French Jew, and she spoke French. My father spoke Italian, but they wanted to be American. My father wanted to be an American, okay? And not that he was ashamed to be an Italian, okay, because he wasn't. He wasn't ashamed to be a Jew either, but he wanted to be Americanized. He wanted to be part of that the greatest generation, and he wanted to be integrated. He spoke only English at home, and he was a little bit self-conscious about his Italian accent, but although it favored him in his business as an antique appraiser, okay, because he was a very charming fellow, and with that accent, he was endeared to everyone, including, of course, his patrons.
Well, once again, before we log off, I do want to plug the book. Please do go on Amazon and pick that up. The link is on the website when you registered for the event, or you